We saw some pitchers pitch like aces. We saw one former ace not look so good. And oh, yeah, Angels, you lost another really dumb one.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast to talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. If you don't believe me, there's my lower third. You can call me Sully. I am an Emmy-nominated television producer who has been a baseball podcaster for well over a decade now, and this is my fifth season here with the Locked On Podcast Network. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow me. Your pal Sully at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And feel free to subscribe to us at YouTube or tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On MLB, or check out some of the other great shows on the Locked On Podcast Network, including Locked On Diamondbacks with our pal Millard Thomas, who will be part of this show later in the episode. We're going to be talking about aces and their great contracts, which ace contracts have worked out over the last decade and which haven't. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Let's quickly take a look at some of the things that happened in baseball. There was a game that was, for those of you in the East Coast, while you slept, the Angels and the A's played a game that was completely bananas. The A's got off to a 5-1 lead over the Angels. The Angels came storming back to put up a 5-spot of their own in the sixth. And then the A's came back, tied the game on a bases-loaded walk, and Ward of the Angels basically did a faceplant into the stands to catch what would have been a go-ahead grand slam with 2 outs in the ninth inning. The Angels went to the bottom of the ninth, could not score, and then the Angels completely fell apart, allowing the A's to score 3 runs in the top of the 10th inning. Sloppy defense, poorly constructed plays, of which the Angels got a 2-run home run in the bottom of the 10th, but fell short 11-10. Once again, the Angels lost a dumb game to the A's, and they've had at least 4 dumb games that they've lost this year. They have 12 losses. 4 of them, just off the top of my head, are dumb. And they're having a Cy Young caliber season from Ohtani, who's continuing to hit. They're having a tremendous start from Trout. They're having Hunter Renfroe looking like he's the best acquisition of the offseason. All these things are happening, and they're still losing more than they're winning. I know it's early, but you can't keep having this happen, especially if you have any thoughts of possibly keeping Shohei Ohtani. Got to get rid of Phil Nevin now. He's an interim manager. He had no business. I mean, he was just there because they got rid of Joe Madden last year. This is not working. The team looks sloppy. There's got to be a sense of urgency on the Angels team. And you know what? I don't see it. The Angels can't afford to have the Ohtani Trout era end with 0 winning seasons. And this is a real possibility because you can't ask for better performance from some of their players right now. And they still are losing more than they're winning. It makes you shake your head. Hey, who owned baseball on the 24th day of April? Spencer Strider took a perfect game deep into the game, and he wound up allowing just 2 hits and struck out 13. The Braves blanked Miami 11-0. Sam Hilliard in that same game. Hilliard hit 2 home runs in the Braves' victory. Wander Franco got 4 hits and got some dazzling defense as the Rays remained perfect at home in a game against the Houston Astros. And Sonny Gray went up against his former team through 7 shutout innings, and the Twins won 6-1. Half walks went to William Contreras, who singled and homered in the Brewers' loss. Nathan Eovaldi pitched well for the Rangers in their loss to the Reds. Justin Jung homered twice in the Rangers' loss to the Reds, and Jordan Montgomery pitched well for the Cardinals in a losing cause. And they all own baseball on April 24th, 2023. Chris Sale pitched for the Red Sox, and the Red Sox gave him a 4-run lead right out of the gate, and he was terrible. I'm sorry. I love everything that Chris Sale did for the Red Sox, but I talk about it in the segment later with Millard. He's cooked. The man is cooked, and the Red Sox may have to pull a Madison Bumgarner. Meanwhile, break up the Orioles. The Orioles have now won 7 games in a row. As I said, it's never the wrong time to win 7 games in a row. And they're, basically keeping step with Tampa Bay. As I mentioned before, beat the defending champs. They're starting to play quality teams. They still haven't lost a game at home. Strider was incredible, and Cobb was tremendous in a complete game victory for the Giants over St. Louis. And, we saw some pretty good ace caliber pitchers. I mentioned Strider's game. I mentioned Sonny Gray's game. Good pitching was going around in baseball. And aces, the number one starter, is that hot commodity and super hard to find. However, signing those aces to long-term deals can be really risky. So when we come back, our good pal Millard Thomas is going to be here, and we're going to be talking about some big contracts that were given out to ace pitchers, and we'll see which one of them worked and which one of them didn't. This episode of Locked On MLB is brought to you by BetterHelp. Now, if you've ever thought about going to therapy, it's not a bad thing. There shouldn't be any stigma to it. I've gone to therapy before, and sometimes, what you do? You need to have someone in your life. Sometimes you need to have someone to talk to. And getting to know yourself is a lifelong process, especially because we're always growing and changing. Now, I've changed my career. I've changed all sorts of things in my life. I'm in my 50s now, and I'm still going on this journey. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way we do until we walk through things. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take on the journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. And you know what? I've really benefited in therapy, and you should too. You should at least give it a shot, because if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time with no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnMLB to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnMLB. All right, everybody, we're here on our Tuesday show, and look who's joining us right over there. It's Millard Thomas. I teased him at the top, and here he is. I did not lie. How you doing, Millard? Wait, what hat are you wearing there?
Oh, it's the hat I've only ever worn on crossovers. My AZ hat.
Oh, your head up there. It looked like you were doing. It looked like a different hat for a second. I'm sorry. My bad. My bad there. By the way, did you see those weird uniforms that the Rangers were wearing over the weekend? There was like a throwback to a uniform that never existed.
I really respected what they did, common graphic designer. So I really respected what they did with their logo, but I just also think their logo looked nothing like anything that would supposed to represent the Texas Rangers. So I was kind of confused. I was like, it's very artistic, but I actually don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, I'd rather, again, it was cool, but again, it didn't remind me of the Rangers. It was, I don't know. I'd give ourselves an Old West thing.
It looked more like the Detroit Tigers, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah. Or if you told me that was like an old time, the back when it was the Cleveland Napoleons or the Cleveland Spiders in the turn of the century, or maybe an old Phillies uniform. But anyway, hey, you and I want to talk a little bit about, we have ace pitchers, which are, I'm just going to say this before we get into what you were talking about here.
Mhm.
One of the reasons why I love baseball, and this is something I think we're slowly moving away from, I hope we get back to it, is the concept of an ace pitcher. That you could have a team that is bad, but once every 5 games when they have a star ace, that team can be favored. Remember when Felix Hernandez won the Cy Young Award, and he did so with I don't like looking at the win loss record; it doesn't really tell you anything. But he had like a 13 and 12 win loss record. He
Mhm.
was playing on a horrible Seattle team in 2010. They were 61 and 101. And yet, every time Felix Hernandez was on the mound, they were the favored team. And that's the when you have an ace, it can change the trajectory of a series. When the Dodgers won the World Series in 1988 against a much better A's team and a much better Mets team in the NLCS, it was because Oral Hershiser was unstoppable. Your Diamondbacks in 2001 were a good team that
Mhm.
happened to have Randy Johnson and Kurt Schilling at their prime at the top of the rotation, and therefore any game that one of those two pitched was borderline an automatic win, which meant two two wins from Schilling, 2 wins from Johnson, clinch Arenio.
Yeah.
And I'm always been drawn to ace pitchers. As a kid, whether it was Steve Carlton, Tom Seaver, Ron Guidry, or later on the Dave Stewarts, the Clemens, the Jack Morrises, the Dave Steebs, to my all-time favorite player, which is Pedro Martinez and the Braves aces. But it's funny, the ace is almost a dying breed. It's why you're seeing Justin Verlander when you talk about the top aces, you're still hearing Scherzer and Verlander's name being kicked around, and DeGrom, who's not as young as people think he is. I mean, it's like it's a dying breed where the occasional Alcantara or Biebers can show up. But talk to me a little bit about what you were finding out about this ace pitchers and why I can lament the loss of the ace.
Yeah, well, basically, I want to do this exercise today because, of course, the D-backs this week DFA'd Madison Bumgarner. So I just wanted to look at some over the last 10 years. I started tracking 2011, just some guys who are around 28 to 30 years old. They signed at least 5 or 6 year deals or longer, and just seeing if those deals ended up working out for both parties, if those teams had hesitancies, or if it was like a complete disaster. And basically, since 2011, I tracked 24 different deals. I broke them down to 3 categories: will do again, never again, and would need to flip a coin to decide. And basically, I gone through year by year to just see how it would stack up. And for the 24 deals, I got 9 good deals, 7 bad deals, and like 4 coin flip deals. So basically, it's like 55-45. Maybe you're likely to end up with a quality starting pitcher when you do give out a big fat time deal in a long-term contract. And if you just go year by year, like in 2011, you had CJ Wilson and Jared Weaver both signed with the Los Angeles Angels, because some of these guys are extensions. And Weaver signed a 5 for 85, Wilson signed a 5 for 77. Both of those guys ended up being pretty good for those teams. But you look at some years like 2013, you had Justin Verlander signed that 7-year $180 million extension with the Tigers. Humongous. He was fantastic. Multiple Cy Youngs, World
Hmm.
Series appearances, great during that year. Adam Wainwright that year signed a 5-year, $97 million deal. And you look at his contract extension, he was basically hurt throughout that whole time with the St. Louis Cardinals when he was under that contract. And then on the other side of it, that's when we had this whole reinvention of Adam Wainwright the last 3 years. But during that contract, it wasn't good. And then the guy you just brought up in 2013, Felix Hernandez, signed a massive deal that year, 7 years, 175. He was very good the first 2 years of that deal, and then like the last 5, he was either hurt or just poor or just performed poorly. So just historically, when you look at these deals, it feels like if you're paying for a guy that's a premium player and you're giving him a premium contract, it feels like more than likely or not, it's going to work out for you. But it's close. It's near a coin flip. And we could go through year by year if you want. But overall, just looking at this historically, it feels like it's a 55% chance of hitting when you sign a long term deal to a pitcher.
Well, and Felix Hernandez is so strange because and look at, I'm all for King Felix getting into the Hall of Fame for his career. But when you take a look at he burst onto the scene as a 20-year-old. By the time he was 21, he was an all-star caliber pitcher. He won the Cy Young Award at age 24. And again, I don't look at the wins because he was playing a couple of years. He was just on dreadful teams, that were just not giving him any run support. But year in and year out, look at his innings pitched starting at age 22, 200 innings, 238 innings, 249 innings, 233, 232, 204, 236, 201. That's up until 201 was his 29th birthday. And so it just looked like, okay, this guy, he looked like he was going to be someone who, like Maddox or Tom Seaver was going to continue to pitch at an elite level into his 30s. But by the time he hit 30, he hit a wall.
Yeah.
His last real, his last real effective year, he was no longer a Cy Young contender in 2016, but, he pitched 25 starts with 153 innings. After that, 16 starts, less than 90 innings. 2018, he was not good. His ERA spiked over 5. And then 2019, he was completely ineffective. And then his career ended with the Mariners. He tried with the Braves. He tried to catch on, and he hasn't pitched since COVID.
Yeah,
His last game he pitched in the major leagues was 2019. And if you had told me at age 29, when he nearly won he came this close to winning his second Cy Young Award, that he wouldn't make it to age 34 as a pitcher, I would have thought you were out of your mind. But sometimes, a career could fall off a cliff like that. And it can make those long-term deals, risky. I think for the most part, it worked out for him in Seattle. And of course, he was a fan favorite. But the long-term effects of some of those contracts are, can be dizzying.
Yeah, because let me go through all the deals that determined bad for this exercise, and we could see the.
Well, I'm always careful to phrase it for this reason, because calling them bad, I'm always feeling like, we're taking the owner's point of view.
Didn't work out.
Not getting the best value. This is not me being politically correct. I just think that there's all these subtle things we're doing to carry the water for the owners, because when, for example, when Hernandez was a legit Cy Young contender early in his career, he was making, I'm scrolling down here to his, he was making about $500,000 and then $3 million. And I think those are bad contracts.
That's
for
true
him.
too.
For him.
Because the issue is at the time that these players signed the deal, like they already, were pitching in baseball 5 to 7 years, and you already got to see so many prime years, already got to put so much work mileage on these arms. And then by the time they sign these deals, like they're already later in their career, they're 28, 29, 30. And then it's like, is it smart to sign a guy to a 5-year, $100 million deal when they're 30 years old? That's kind of the whole point of the exercise. But really,
not.
But the real premise is these guys, like we're seeing with all the new rules, need to be paid earlier, because when you're putting up Cy Young performances, I think as a team, you feel better, even though the system, the way it's been, those players are so cheap. You're getting Cy Young performances from guys you're barely paying. But then on the back end, you are paying them, and then they look like one of the worst pitchers in baseball. So it's like, I think you would rather just be happy if you pay these guys early when they're actually living up to their contract standards, and then just let them walk later and let them go someplace else, probably.
Here's how I look at it. If someone puts together 10 great years, I want to make sure they get paid 10 big years of contracts. It may not perfectly line up to when the value equals the dollar, but the fact that he was the Mariners got him on the cheap at the beginning of his career, I don't feel too bad about the 3 or 4 years at the end where they were paying for the broken down. Me, it's evened out, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's
but you're right. You're seeing that now. Teams are getting ahead of it. So we're just going to buy out your prime. And I'm all for that. I'm 100%. Okay, we're with Millard Thomas. Get going.
for
The
the list or the ad
the
read?
list.
Okay, I didn't know that was like a segue to the ad read. Okay, yeah. So let's look at some of the worst contracts over the last 10 years and see what the commonalities are between them. Because I think, like we are saying, a lot of these teams are paying more for past performance, and often some of it's like it's a homegrown guy, right? You want to keep them in the building. I think like a Felix Hernandez is like that. Like if he would have left the city of Seattle after all he's done for that city up until that point, like the city would have rioted and set Seattle burn. So I think someone like him had to get rewarded with that big contract. But he kind of starts off the list back in 2013. He's the first guy I have down because when I say terrible contract, like you're saying, it's after they signed the deal. It's not what they did before the deal. It's basically essentially at the time that they sign it and then all the performances that they have after that. So for Hernandez, 28 years old, 7'4", 175 in 2013. This one I forgot about. This was an extension with the Cincinnati Reds. Homer Bailey at 28 years old, 6 years, 105, and he was terrible that whole deal. He barely played with injuries, and then when he did play, he was really bad. 2015, you'll remember this one. 30 years old, 7 for 215. David Price, the Boston Red Sox. And I think the Red Sox and the Dodgers would say that's not a very good deal. Yes, his best season was 2018 when the Red Sox won the World Series, but pretty up and down the rest of the seasons. It was basically a reliever like the last 2 years of that contract. When you get paid over $30 million a year, that's a bad contract. 2018 at 29 years old, Patrick Corbin got 6 years, 140 from the Washington Nationals. Good that first season, like we talked about, 11th in Cy Young voting. And then the next few seasons, absolutely one of the worst pitchers in Major League Baseball. And then in 2019, you really have a slew of bad contracts with Steven Strasburg, 7 for 245 after winning the World Series. We literally, we've maybe seen him pitch 5 starts in the last 3 seasons since signing that deal. Disaster. Madison Bumgarner, DFA'd by the D-backs, 5 years, $85 million. He's gone. And then Chris Sale, 5 for 145 extension in the summer of 2019 as well. And that's been a disaster for the Red Sox. So I have those 7 bad deals. And I think when you look at all of them, a lot of it has to do with injuries like the Strasburgs and the Chris Sales of the world, the Felix Hernandezes, the Homer Baileys, or just these guys are 31, 32. They probably broke into Major League Baseball super young, like the David Prices and the Mad Bums. Like those guys broke, like Mad Bum was 19 when he broke into Major League Baseball. David Price was super young. So a lot of those guys, it's like, yeah, when they signed that deal, even though they might have only been 29, 30 when they signed that big time contract, like they already had 1,000 innings on their arm. And they already had, 6-7 years of 200 plus inning season. So it's like those guys might have been young in terms of how we view athletes at 29, 30. That's still considered your quote unquote prime. But compared to your normal baseball player, like most guys in baseball don't break in at 19, 20, and 21. And the guys like Mad Bum were. So it wasn't surprised to see their careers end earlier as opposed to most other guys who could still pitch in their early 30s.
I remember, and I had some people absolutely trash me when I said this back in around the time the beginning of my stint at Locked On, where I said that the Red Sox were coming off of the 2018 World Series, and I said they should have traded Chris Sale right then and there. And my reasoning was this: I took a look at Chris Sale and said this guy is a major injury waiting to happen. And the Red Sox, no matter what they gave up, whether Moncada or anyone else was going to flourish, they got exactly what they needed from Chris Sale. They got 2 great. His first season in 2017, where he struck out 308 batters and 214 innings pitched, and only walked 43. There was a legit argument for him to win the Cy Young that year. He didn't, but there was a legit argument for it. And then the next year, of course, is the year they win the World Series. And who's standing on the mound when they win the World Series? Chris Sale. I said at that point, he did everything you asked him to do. As a Red Sox fan, you couldn't ask for more than Chris Sale. And I said, and I think he had a year left on his contract at that point. And I said, trade him right now, because he is going to break down. Everyone in their moose could see that he's going to break down, and get whatever you can for him. Top value. Instead, they offered him a contract extension. Now again, thank you very much, Chris Sale, and he'll never have to buy a drink again in Massachusetts for helping win the World Series, albeit one where there was some shadiness happening. But the fact of the matter is that contract may have prevented them from extending Mookie Betts. The same thing with the Eovaldi extension, or when they signed a bunch of the players who did a great job to win the 2018 World Series, but you knew were going to be injury risks. They should have focused everything on extending Betts and Bogarts. Instead, they extended Eovaldi, they extended Sale, and Sale. By the time he was part of the team that went to the ALCS in 2021, but he wasn't that good. He only pitched a handful of games and was not effective at all in the postseason. And oh man, people trashed me for how dare you say that about Sale this or Sale that. I go like, yeah, he missed the entire COVID year. He made 9 starts in 21, 2 starts last year, the whole year. And this year he's been bad.
Yeah.
So
And sometimes I
yeah.
think I wonder if Shane Bloom is like a Trojan horse for the Boston Red Sox, because like you pay Chris Sale the big contract, but then you have to trade away Mookie Betts because you can't afford him. You sign Trevor Story, but yet you let Xander Bogaerts walk in free agency. Just the decision making from the Red Sox front office of who to give money to and who to let walk, it's just been asinine over the last few years. And this is one of those contracts that just further illustrate that.
I'm not that I'm going to let Bloom off the hook for anything. But the re-signing of Sale was Dombrowski. That was a Dombrowski
Okay.
move.
Thank you for correcting me there.
Yeah. Now the trading away of Betts for, look at Verdugo's having a good season this year. He's still not Mookie freaking Betts. How you don't build a team around Betts, Bogarts, and Devers will never make any sense to me. Not even a little bit. But there you go. Here we are. Here we're sitting there. And that's one of the only reasons why, like Sale had a couple of Cy Young caliber seasons with Chicago in 2012 and 2013. And in 2012, he made $500,000. In 2013, he made $850,000. By 2014, he was still a Cy Young contender, making $3 million. So he was underpaid at a certain point of his career. So I don't mind some overpay, but my goodness, he's still, he has a vesting option for 2025 with the Red Sox. So, this will help the Red Sox to get out of this, because Lord knows they're hurting for money.
Well, Sully, I want to go over the best pitchers that helped make a great team. But for the listeners, if they think they could build a great team using a fantasy app, that they need to download So Rare, because our new sponsor, So Rare, is a revolutionary fantasy baseball game and marketplace, transforming fans into owners with officially licensed digital cards featuring players from across all 30 MLB teams. Unlike other fantasy baseball platforms, So Rare managers truly own their fantasy experience, collecting, buying, selling, and competing with player cards against global opponents to win epic rewards. Win or lose, you still own your cards, and there's no cost to play. Plus, the more you win, the more you advance, collecting increasingly powerful cards and accessing next level competition and rewards. So Rare MLB game weeks happen twice weekly and span a 3 to 4 day cycle. At the end of game weeks, So Rare MLB managers who rank at or near the top of their leaderboards win a variety of rewards, which can include So Rare Scarcity cards, game tickets, merchandise, signed jerseys, and VIP experiences like meeting MLB stars. Prizes may vary depending on the competition, so head to SoRare.com/lockedon. That's spelled SORE.com to draft your team of free player cards, set your lineups, and start competing today to win epic rewards. Again, that's SoRare.com/lockedon to start playing today. All right, Sully. It's okay if I give you the list now of contracts I did work out for pitchers and see what the
Let's go.
commonality. All right. Let me pull up my list here because these are the pitchers who did sign big time deals and did live up to their contracts in 2011. Jared Weaver, 5 for 85. He was very good those first 3 years of that contract, struggled the last two, but I think the Angels, that was probably the last time because they signed both CJ Wilson, Jared Weaver that offseason. Weaver was an extension, but that was the last time the Angels probably had a competent rotation. Sad for Angels fans. 2012, Zach Greinke at 29 years old signed a 6-year, $147 million deal with the Dodgers. He was elite over the 3 seasons with the Dodgers, 2.31 ERA. Then he decided to opt out and sign with a different team who we'll get into later, but that was a very good contract for what he did with the Dodgers. Cole Hamels, 29. 6 years, 144 with the Phillies. Only played 2 seasons with the Phillies before being traded at the deadline to the Texas Rangers. Spent a couple seasons there, then got traded at the deadline again to the Chicago Cubs. But he was healthy throughout. He was durable and pitched pretty well. None of those teams he was on was really good. But in terms of his performance, I think he lived up to the 6-year, $144 million contract. 2013, we talked about Justin Verlander, 31, 7 years, 180. He had 4 top 5 finishes, 2 runner-ups, a World Series ring, and a Cy Young trophy as well. He was fantastic. 2014, his brother in crime, Max Scherzer, at age 30, signed a 7-year, $210 million deal with the Washington Nationals. He won 2 Cy Youngs, a World Series ring. That's a good deal.
Can I pause you for 1 second there?
Yeah, please.
Because without doing a lot of research like you've done,
yeah,
just off the top of my head, if I'm going to start listing some of the greatest free agent contracts of all time in terms of bringing someone in and they delivered the goods, I think as pitchers go, the 2 greatest ones were Greg Maddux signing with the Braves, Randy Johnson signing with the Diamondbacks, and right up there is Max Scherzer's contract with the Washington Nationals. When you look on what he did because he was already an elite pitcher with Detroit, a product of the Arizona Diamondbacks farm system. And we won't get into that horrific trade for the D-backs. He was already an elite Cy Young. He won a Cy Young award with the Tigers. Was still a Cy Young caliber pitcher when he pitched his final year with Detroit in 2014, arrived in Washington in 2015, and every single year between 15, 16, 17, 18, he was, if not the Cy Young Award winner, then right up there. And then the 1 year where then 2019, which he was hurt for a little bit of that, so he wasn't in the top Cy Young contention. But that was the year the Washington Nationals won the World Series, and he was a big part of that. And he wound up not that I like to look at win-loss records, but his win-loss record in the postseason that year was 3-0.
Yeah, so when you look at some of the deals so far that we talked about, the Verlanders, the Scherzers, it's like, first ballot Hall of Famers, guys who are studs. Like, those guys lived up to it. Zach Greinke's of the world. Maybe Weaver and Cole Hamels aren't on that level, but it's legit studs that have lived up to it. But the next guy who was also signed 2014 at age 31, he's probably not on the Scherzer Verlander level. He's probably more of a low end number 1, high end number 2, but he did live up to the 6-year, $155 million contract he got from the Cubs. Jon Lester ended up being really good, got a big deal, 3.64 ERA over 6 seasons, and of course had the greatest season of his career in 2016 en route to breaking the curse. Jon Lester was phenomenal for the Cubs.
And lest we forget, no pun intended, he was the co-MVP of the 2016 National League Championship Series, which is the only pennant the Cubs have won in the divisional era. The only time the Cubs have ever won the National League Championship Series, Jon Lester was the co-MVP of that series. So he came up big. He came up huge in the National League Division Series with the Game 1 win where he had to I'm doing this off the top of my head, but he had a 1-0 shutout duel with Johnny Cueto in the opening game of that series, and then pitched well, including coming out of the bullpen in Game 7 of the World Series when the Cubs finally clinched it. So he not only lived up to his expectation of being a big game pitcher. Because remember, he was a huge game pitcher for the Red
Mhm.
Sox in his postseason. A's fans still won't forgive him for not throwing over to first during the wild card game against the Royals, but I digress. But Cubs fans have to feel wonderful about what he did as a pitcher and help deliver them to the promised land in the World Series.
Yeah, 2016, he looked like he was on another level, and the numbers back it up. Career season for John Lester back then. So, really good deal for the Chicago Cubs and broke the curse. It's crazy to think that the Red Sox traded Yoenis Cespedes, acquired him for John Lester. So, don't need to rehash that. 2015, this one's kind of fun. Zach Greinke back on the market, signs a 6-year, $206 million deal with the D-backs. I don't think the deal's actually that bad. It's a lot of money. The first year in Arizona is not very good, but then the next two is an all-star back-to-back seasons, gets traded to Houston and helps them get to a couple World Series runner-up appearances. So I think that ends up actually being like a solid contract. In 2016, before the bad Steven Strasburg contract, he did sign his first extension, 7 for 175 in 2016, and he ended up having 3 really good seasons, and then he opted out right after the 2019 World Series. So that was the first half of that first extension, and it looked really good. It was when he hit that second extension when he opted out, signed the 7 for 250, and it ended up just being a disaster.
I think though that first extension was important for the culture of the Nationals, and I actually remember
Yeah.
that because he was a Boris client, and Boris always brings his um, clients out to free agency. But I do remember when he signed that, he was basically saying, "Look, I want to win here. I don't want to win elsewhere." There was the notion they had Harper and Strasburg. Harper was clearly going to go test the waters as a free agent. But Strasburg, who's a different personality, he wanted to win in Washington, and he
Yeah.
didn't want to test the waters. And it did have the happy ending that he not only won his World Series title with the Nats, but he was the World Series MVP when they finally did win. So they probably got a little over eager and signed him to the
Yeah.
big long extension as like that was kind of his parting gift. Thank you for shopping Nationals. But that for just the culture of it, like yeah, one of these two players who we had as number one overall picks that we're building our team around is going to stick around, and I
Yeah.
thought that was important for the Nationals.
I think whenever you have like that homegrown guy that you're advertising, like the whole time he was in the minor leagues, he was being advertised to Bryce Harper as the player of the future to build around. I remember watching his debut because it was so highly anticipated, and it's like you were going to re-sign that guy, especially the fact that he lived up to those potentials, his ceiling. Like you saw, whenever he was healthy, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball. Then he did win the World Series after your other number one pick left, like you said. Like there was no way the Nationals weren't going to resign Steven Strasburg. The sad thing is, as soon as he got that second big deal, it all fell apart, and we've barely seen him since. Then the last big contract that ended up working out that I want to talk about is from 2019. Zach Wheeler signed a 5-year, 118 deal. He's only in the 4th year of that deal, but the first 3 years he's at a sub-3 ERA. Looked like a Cy Young candidate every single season. Even if he's bad these last 2 years, I think the contract itself has already been worth it. Got that team to the World Series, broke the playoff drought for Philadelphia. Those are my 9 really good deals. I can also give you my 4 coin flips if you want to hear that too.
Okay, yeah, let me see my take on the coin flips.
Okay, yeah. So these are the coin flips. 2011, CJ Wilson, 5 for 77 with the Angels. He was good the first 2 years. He was second to all. He was like all right the second 2 years. And then the last year, he had a season ending shoulder surgery and it ended his career, and he never pitched again in Major League Baseball. So you only got 4 out of 5 years out the contract.
Well, anytime you get 4 out of 5, that's not bad. And the
Mm-hmm.
first two, he was pretty good.
Yeah, that's
He
why it's a
was
coin
pretty
flip.
good.
That's why I
Yeah.
was like,
So
yeah.
I could see that. I could see that be able to hear both sides. Who else you got?
Adam Wainwright, 32, 5 years for 97. He wasn't good on the extension, but the reason I said it was a coin flip because the Cardinals held on to him throughout the whole contract, and then you were able to come out on the other side where you got this reinvented Adam Wainwright on now a cheap deal where he's been good the last 3 years. So the contract extension itself wasn't good when he was getting paid $20 million a year, but the fact that he got through it, that's why I'm like, it's a coin flip because you go through the bad contract to get the cheap years on the back end with the last 3 years that he just
And
got.
he's one of the great pitchers in the history of the Cardinals,
Yeah.
who has been exceptional as a starting pitcher over 3 different decades, and as a reliever clinched a World Series for him. So I mean, at some point, I'm like, You know what? He deserves to keep that Cardinal pride that you have the guy who was on the mound when they won the 2006 World Series still on the team in the 2022 playoffs. There's something to that. And he
2012.
and he and he led the league in shutouts in 2021. So it's not like he was a chump by the end.
Yeah, no, that's when he got like his new baby contract. That's really cheap. That's why I'm like, okay, got to
Yeah,
get through those 5 really bad years, but then you got the cheap years with Adam
yeah,
Wainwright after that on the new deal. So it's interesting. In 2012, Annabelle Sanchez signed with the Detroit Tigers, 5 years, $80 million.
mhm,
And he had a 4.43 ERA over his 5.5 seasons with the Tigers. But say it's a coin flip because those first 2 seasons in Detroit, really good and helped
yeah.
them get to the World Series, where he was really good in the postseason as well. So it's like, yeah, the back end of that deal wasn't good, but the first half of it was pretty good. And you got them to the World Series. That's why I'm like, it's probably a coin flip of a contract.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
And then
All
the
right.
last one, and then one more, Yu Darvish, 31, 2017, signed 6 years, $126 million with the Cubs. But Darvish is good, but I don't think the Cubs feel validated by that contract because he only pitched like 2, 3 years there and he wasn't that good with the Cubs. He's been good the second half of the deal with the San Diego Padres, but I don't think the Cubs franchise would give Darvish the deal again. If he signed with a different team like the Padres from the onset, then I think it would probably be considered a good contract. But just what he did with Chicago, I don't think Chicago feels validated with that deal they gave him.
Well, I also think because the trade from they didn't. I mean, they got Victor Caratini. Oh no, they got Owen Cassie, minor leaguer. The only player they got back in the deal who was a major leaguer was Zach Davies. So in many ways, that's who's now with Arizona. I mean, in so many ways, they got the worst of both deals because not only did they signed Darvish for a big honking deal, and the Padres are the team that's benefiting from it. And what they got back hasn't affected the major league team at all. So I think that turned out to be a smart contract, just not for the Cubs.
hmm Yeah. So basically, the overall premise from doing this exercise, about a 55% success rate when you sign a pitcher to a long term deal. And the more the higher, what's the way I want to say it? The more highly valued the pitcher is, whether it's a Verlander or Scherzer, the more he's considered in the consensus rankings of major league pitchers, the better your chances are of the contract being successful. Because if you're signing a guy like Patrick Corbin to a big deal or Homer Bailey, you better believe there's going to be some risk there. But if you're signing the Verlanders and the Scherzers of the world, then you got a better chance of that contract actually turning out to be okay. And you never know, you're still going to have the coin flips with the Chris Sales and the Steven Strasburgs of the world, who are ace pitchers, but if they break down, they break down, and it is what it is at that point.
Well, you're not going to break down. In fact, you brought the goods here today. Hey, Millard Thomas, thanks for jumping in. Tell people where they can listen to your great show.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24. Look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram. Please hit subscribe on the Locked On Diamondbacks YouTube channel, and please subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks wherever you stream Locked On MLB.
And you can follow us on Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And please subscribe to YouTube and check out the YouTube Shorts where I tell you who owns baseball every single day. Talking about player values of those ace pitchers, along with Millard Thomas of Locked On Diamondbacks. I'm your pal Sully of Locked On MLB. Good week again. Let's fist pump and see you next week.